Hi, welcome to the Sharpshooter Workshop. I'm First Sergeant Cat with Company D, 2nd United States Sharpshooters. And in this episode, we are going to show you how to make your own rivets inexpensively and easily for your historical reproductions. Now, before we get started, you can actually buy correct rivets online at a website called RJ Lee. I'll have the website in the description below. But if you plan on making more than one project, you're going to end up with a substantial index of these. You'll probably need different diameters, you'll need different lengths depending on your projects. And to save you sort of the time and expense, especially if you're making small batch items, it makes a little more sense for your pocketbook and your time to make your own rivets, and they work just fine. And you don't even have to be a blacksmith. Now, some of you may be familiar from your local hardware store, these sort of copper rivets that you can buy sometimes at Ace or True Value Hardware. And while they do exist in the little containers, they are almost never big enough for what you need. The diameters are always very small, they're never very long, so you'd never be able to use one on a chair leg, for example. And they're also very much modern, so these are kind of out of the equation. Now, to show you how our homemade rivets work, you don't have to be a blacksmith. This here is a footboard for a folding camp cot that I recently made our captain. And you can see here I have my shop-made rivets, so that way these legs can swivel up for easy packing and storage. You can see they made up pretty well on the back side as well. Now, you can also make your own rivets for small items. For example, here is a folding camp mirror that I made out of some figured maple. And here, instead of using steel stock, I use brass. Use a small brass rod, cut it to length, flare the ends, and you have your very own homemade brass rivet on the cheap. So to get started, you're going to need a few tools. For this example, your actual uses are going to vary depending on what you're making. But for like this headboard, for example, I got some 1/4 inch cold rolled round stock from my local hardware store. It's important that you get cold rolled because cold rolled is the softer of the steels, and it'll flare nicely. It'll give up to your hammer well. And so stay away from the zinc, the stainless steel. It just won't work the same for you. Not to mention, as we covered in a previous video, zinc is definitely not period correct. Now, once you find your size of rod that you want to use for your rivets, you have to go to the washer section. And you don't just go and grab the first box of 1/4 inch washers that you find, because you don't want the same size as the rod. You want whatever is going to fit this snugly. And in my case, it was actually a metric washer. And I just took my time and tried on different washers, because the more play you have, the less likely it's going to stay on there. And you can see just how nice and snug that 6mm washer fits under the 1/4 inch rod. So trial and error, just find whatever fits as best as you possibly can at the hardware store before you get going. Let's see. Yeah. So some other tools you're gonna need a vise of some sort. I have a couple big boys over there, but for the sake of the demonstration, I just have a little machinist vise set up. Something hard to hammer on. It could be anything. I just have a little anvil. Sometimes I'll just hammer it onto the top or the back of the vise itself that I'm using. And then a hacksaw or your chosen method of cutting steel, maybe a flat file, and a ball peen hammer. So I've already cut one length. I always, when I get started, I prefer to cut these longer than I need, and then mark my exact length, and then trim that down to size. It's a lot easier than having to go back to this all the time. So we have our rough length, so we now need to peen one side. So we'll fit this in the vise, since you're going to be hitting on this, you got to make sure your vise is nice and tight. And dress up any rough edges from your sawing. And then you start hammering. Now these hammers are designed for a certain way. The peen will actually expand the metal that you're working on. And then you just start hammering away. As you can see, sometimes these will move on you just because of the amount of force you're putting on it. And you'll also notice that I'm not beating the living life out of this piece of metal. It's a really rookie mistake a lot of people make, whether you're working on sheet metal or round stock or anything. Metal will actually give, so you're stretching and forming the metal. So just hit it enough so you can see what's happening. You kind of flatten out the middle, expand the metal out the side, and then I'm working on the edges. So you can see in just a few hits, I've managed to flare the tip of that round stock. And depending on how much hold or grip your rivet needs is how much flare you're going to get. And also just the quality of the steel you're working with is going to dictate. If you flare too much, the ends can start cracking. And then you just kind of back off a little bit. But now you can already see our washer stays on nice and snug with just that little bit. So you can go back and keep flaring if you want, but for the sake of demonstration, I think we're ready to move on. So I just have a couple pieces of wood here, and I drilled a hole that will match the size of our stock that we're working with. Now this part's always really important. You have to not only put your washer on, but you also have to make sure you have enough room that you don't have so much left over that you can't peen it and you get a loose joint, but you also have to make sure you leave enough metal so you can actually peen it over. So this might take a little trial and error, but if you're trying out for the first time, you can always cut it long and then file it off and try it again. So I marked my spot. I can take it all apart now. Put it back in my vise. And depending on how big, this sometimes can get heated depending on how fast you can hand saw. So then we'll stick this in the vise real quick. Put it in there lightly just to clean up any burrs, sharp edges, make it nice and safe. Okay. So now we reassemble. We put our washer onto the side with our formed head. Line up our pieces. Put our under washer on. So that one right now I can tell is a little too long. So you can either resaw it or file it down. We're going to keep going. So I just have the mushroom side on the anvil. And again, And there you have it. You have a swinging rivet. So sometimes you might want it loose, especially if it's like a folding chair or something. You might want to have some give to it. If I was like on that, this on the headboard, this wouldn't be snug enough for me. But you can see how with just a few tools and a couple dollars around stock, you can make your own rivets. If you have any questions about this video or future videos that you'd like to see, be sure to leave your comment down below, and be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.